Hello, everybody. This lecture will be about another conception of free will, an alternative to libertarianism known as compatibilism or soft determinism. I will be primarily talking about the philosopher Stace here. You may or may not have read this paper. If it is available in the proper form online, I will link to the paper. If not, you only have to read the section on compatibilism in the reader and or any additional supplemental material that I may add to replace Stace. The reason for this oddity is again to keep the prices of books down, which are the most expensive part of community college. If you can't read Stace, just pay close attention to this lecture and the key terms and concepts I present at the end of every module. I will only test on the material so far as it is covered, which of course includes your understanding and applying of the concepts. So, as mentioned, we are going to talk about the theory of compatibilism here. This is the theory that holds that free will exists and that free will does not mean could have done otherwise if everything in the universe were exactly the same. Instead, compatibilists say that free will means that one could have done otherwise if one had wanted to do otherwise, or if they had different desires. Of course, if one wanted to do otherwise, then the conditions are not exactly the same. It isn't like rewinding time and saying that one could have done differently in exactly the same circumstances. So compatibilists agree with libertarians that free will exists, but disagree with libertarians and hard determinists about their definition of free will. In addition to soft determinism, this view could easily be modified to fit a view that I call soft indeterminism, the view that some events in the universe are truly random, but that free will exists under this new definition. Note that it will turn out that for reasons that we saw as part of the determinism-indeterminism dilemma, that random actions are not free. A soft determinist might believe that some actions are random, but in order for actions to be free, soft indeterminists will say that they need to have the right kind of cause, meaning that they are not random. Even though Stace is arguing against determinism as well, his primary concern is with defeating hard determinists. This is because he felt that the role of science is expanding and religion decreasing. Science has been incredibly successful, and this success is based on deterministic worldview. This success makes it difficult to deny that determinism is true. He therefore felt that hard determinism is a danger to moral standards. Remember why determinism might seem like an issue for morality. Remember that it is typically assumed that people are only morally responsible for an act if they could have done otherwise. In a previous lecture, we used the example of deliberately punching somebody because you found them annoying versus accidentally striking somebody because you lost control of your body due to a shock or a seizure to illustrate this. We tend to say that people are responsible for the first kind of action, but not the second. Stace rejects the libertarian and hard determinist could have done otherwise in a universe that was exactly the same view, but adopts a different could have done otherwise type of view. One is free if one could have done otherwise if one had wanted to do otherwise. This might at first seem a bit like playing with words. Of course, if the world is different, we could have done differently. But we will see that Stace has some strong reasons for rejecting the libertarian notion of free will. Stace argues that even hard determinists can't help but act as if they believe in free will. He thinks, for example, that such hard determinists do things like ask what somebody wants for dinner, or scold a child for lying, or consider what to spend money on, and numerous other things that seem to assume that choice is possible. Such questions and actions seem to assume free choice. So why do hard determinists believe as they do? Stace believes that this problem for free will is largely a verbal dispute, that is to say a semantic problem. He gives the example of defining a man to be a five-legged animal. Sure, if we define human beings to be a five-legged animal, then it seems like no such creatures exist, and so we might conclude that there is no such thing as a human being. Of course, all the things that we actually currently call humans do not now disappear from the planet. We are instead just applying an arbitrary definition that excludes what we now call humans. The problem is with their definition of human being, not with their ontological status. He says, there's a sense in which one can define a word arbitrarily in any way one pleases, but a definition may nevertheless be called correct or incorrect. It is correct if it accords with common usage of the word defined. It is incorrect if it does not. So Stace is saying that we have a problem with their definition if we are defining the word such that it doesn't accord with common usage. He's not here denying that sometimes we can justifiably use terms in a more specific way. The problem here, though, is that if we were to use the word man to mean this new thing, a five-legged animal, and then also use the term to suggest that human beings, what we believe we are now talking about when we say the word man, do not exist, we would be committing a fallacy. This might be a version of the fallacy of equivocation, using the same word or term in two different senses as if it had only one sense. So, in order to get the correct definition of free will, Stace thinks that we have to look at the way that we actually use the phrase. Our definition of free will should capture those acts that we say are free and exclude those that we say are unfree. We can then ask if that definition is metaphysically supported, and if so, how. Stace is using what is sometimes called ordinary language philosophy. This is a way of seeing many philosophical problems as rooted in misunderstandings that result from philosophical distortion of words and terms. So how do we get the correct definition of free will? We look at actual cases. Stace wants us to evaluate how examples of the term free will is affirmed and how it is denied in normal language, and he gives us numerous examples. From these examples, we will derive his understanding of free will. Remember, when considering these cases, that we are largely concerned with moral responsibility. We are asking how we normally use the concept of freedom in language to decide when somebody is responsible for an action. Let's look at some examples. Consider two people talking. Jones says, "I once went without food for a week." Smith responds, "Did you do that of your own free will?" And Jones replies, "No, I did it because I was lost in the desert and could find no food." We would not call this action free. That is to say that this person did not freely decide to go without food. Now contrast this with the following exchange. Gandhi, "I once fasted for a week." Smith, "Did you do that of your own free will?" Gandhi, "Yes, I did it because I wanted to compel the British government to give India its independence." This act seems free. Gandhi wasn't forced by circumstances to forego food, he chose to do so because of his values. Here is another example. Suppose that a judge asks, "Did you steal the bread of your own free will?" And suppose Stace says, "Yes, I stole it because I was hungry." This act seems like it is free. Now contrast that with, "Judge, did you steal the bread of your own free will?" And Stace responding, "No, I did it because my employer threatened to beat me if I did not." While we are inclined to call the first case free, this case seems unfree. Let's consider another case. This case once again involves a judge. Suppose that a judge asks, "Did you sign this confession of your own free will?" And the prisoner responds, "No, I signed it because the police beat me up." We probably wouldn't call that free. This can be contrasted with, "Judge, did you sign this confession of your own free will?" Prisoner, "Yes, I wanted to tell the truth." In this case, there was no external force causing the prisoner to sign the confession. He or she did so because she wanted to tell the truth. We would call this free. Let's look at another. Suppose Jones and Smith are talking. This time Jones asks, "Did you go out of your own free will?" And Smith says, "Yes, I went out to get my lunch." That sounds like a free act. We can contrast that with, Jones, "Did you leave your office of your own free will?" Smith, "No, I was forcibly removed by the police." This seems like a clear case in which Smith was not free. You might want to pause here for a moment and see if you can think of what the differences are between these kinds of cases. Feel free to literally pause the video and think for a while. To help, here is a list of the acts as we categorize them. Now, remember what prevented acts from being free under both the hard determinist and libertarian schemas. If an action was caused, it was said that it could not be free. This is because if it was caused, it would happen the same way every time if time were rewound. That's to say, every time if the universe were exactly the same. Stace says that this cannot be the difference. Sure, the acts on the right-hand side are caused. The man fasted in the desert because he had no food. The man stole bread because he was threatened. The man signed the confession because he was beaten. And the man left the building because he was dragged out. But notice that the acts we are calling free are also caused. Gandhi fasted because he wanted to free India. His act was caused by his want. The person stole bread because he was hungry and wanted some bread. The person signed the confession because he wanted to tell the truth. Had he not wanted to tell the truth, he would not have signed it. His wanting is what caused the signing. Likewise, the person who left the building because he wanted lunch did so because of his desires. So, what is the difference? Can you spot it? The difference is the location of the cause. For the acts that we call free, the person was caused to act by internal psychological motivations. The action was the result of the person's character. The unfree acts were also caused. but they were caused by external factors or circumstances outside of the agent. Lack of food meant that though the person wanted to eat, he could not. Being dragged out of the office by police meant that, though the person wanted to stay, his will was ineffectual. Leaving was not the result of his beliefs or desires. Stace therefore concludes that the difference between free and unfree acts isn't whether they are deterministically caused or not. It is rather about how they are deterministically caused. Free acts are caused by personalities, or desires, motivations. Unfree acts are caused by external factors. He says, what then is the difference between acts which are freely done and those which are not? What is the characteristic which is present to all facts on the left-hand column and absent from all those on the right-hand column? Is it not obvious that, although both sets of actions have causes, the causes of those in the left-hand column are of a different kind than those in the right-hand column? The free acts are all caused by desires or motives, or by some sort of internal psychological states of the agent's mind. The unfree acts are all caused by physical forces or physical conditions outside of the agent. And he says, acts freely done are those whose immediate causes are psychological states in the agent. Acts not freely done are those whose immediate causes are states of affairs external to the agent. That is the general theory. There are, you might have noticed, still what we might call puzzling cases. The person being dragged out by police could not have stayed, so we say that this act was unfree. But what about the case where the person signed the confession because he was being beaten? This person could have elected not to sign it and continue to be beaten. So that person still acted through psychological motivation. His hand wasn't moved for him. Stace thinks that paying careful attention to language can help resolve the issue. Imagine the following example of a puzzling case. Person A points a gun at person B and says, your money or your life. Person B gives person A the money. He gave the money because he wanted to live. Did person B act freely? Stace notes that under his definition, this person's actions would be called free. He gave the money to the robber because of his fear of death. However, remember, Stace cares about how we use language. He notes that most people would consider this compulsion, not a free act. So Stace asks if this shows his definition of freedom is wrong, and he thinks that no, it does not. Stace instead calls these mixed cases. He says that in the case of being shot or being beaten, the threat so nearly approximated to actual force that we tend to say that the case was one of compulsion. It is a borderline case. Remember that what we are largely concerned about with free will is moral responsibility. So these cases are not necessarily as threatening as they seem. When evaluating whether a person was morally responsible for something, we are evaluating that person's character. Did the act come from that person's character in a way that is praiseworthy or blameworthy? If it is the case that just about anybody would have acted the same way, regardless of their character, then that person probably is not blameworthy. We might even have degrees of blameworthiness based on the severity of the situation. If somebody robs a bank because his children were being held hostage and their lives were threatened if he did not rob the bank, then he might not be blameworthy. If, on the other hand, the person robs the bank because he was dared to and didn't want to be called a chicken, then he probably is. The risk of being called names isn't the kind of threat most people would act on. A more in-between case might be if the person was being blackmailed. Now you might notice another possible puzzle here. This is what would puzzle libertarians and hard determinists. Stace notes that, according to our view, an action may be free even though it could have been predicted beforehand with certainty. Remember Laplace's computer. So suppose that one calculated beforehand that a person was going to lie at a particular time. So maybe it predicts that you will lie before you do so. How can you have free will regarding that lie if you could not have done otherwise? After all, the computer predicted your behavior. Does this undermine free will? Stace thinks no, it does not. Stace's reply to this is that a person could have done otherwise if a person had wanted to do otherwise. Of course, given a person's brain state and psychology, a person must have had the wants she or he did. But remember, alternative possibilities under the same physical conditions are not part of Stace's definition. What is important here is that you are acting in accord with your own will, your own psychological state. Nothing was stopping you from doing differently had you wanted to do differently. Stace says, if, knowing your character, I predict you will act honorably, no one would say when you do act honorably that this shows that you did not do so of your own free will. Indeed, it probably says more about your moral character the more certain I am of this fact, up to the point of total certainty. If, on the other hand, I am asked if you will act honorably and I say, I don't know, it could go either way, my uncertainty doesn't seem to add anything to your moral determination. Stace says, but that determinism is incompatible with moral responsibility is as much of a delusion as that it is incompatible with free will. You do not excuse a man for doing a wrong act because, knowing his character, you felt certain beforehand that he would do it. Nor do you deprive a man of a reward or prize because, knowing his goodness or his capacities, you felt certain beforehand that he would win it. What Stace is saying here is that when we praise or blame a person, we are, in fact, praising or blaming their moral character, which causes their act. It therefore isn't just the case that determinism is compatible with free will for somebody like Stace. An action being determined is required for free will and moral responsibility. It just needs to be determined in the right way. To the extent that your action is determined by random quantum swervings or anything else random, you are not free. You are free when you act in accordance with your desires. Imagine somebody on trial for a brutal murder, for example. This person says to the judge, yes, I killed him, but I couldn't help it. You see, I'm just a really evil person, and killing him was the result of my evil character. I just love to kill. My love of killing caused me to kill, so clearly I'm not responsible. Assume that you know that the murder really did result from this person's character. Would you say that she or he was not morally responsible for the murder? Probably not. The fact that this person loves killing and that this drove him to kill is what makes him so guilty. Now imagine that somebody committed murder and says to the jury, yes, I killed him, but it was out of my character to do so. I never would do something like that except for the fact that somebody slipped drugs into my coffee that reduces a person's impulse control, makes the person angry, and makes the person paranoid. Imagine that it has been proven beyond any doubt that this person was indeed given these drugs unwillingly and that these drugs have a high impact on the behavior of people. Would you find this person more or less morally responsible than the first? Of course, we're still left with some cases that we have to hash out. There are cases, for example, where a person might have a tumor that causes violent desires that person acts on. Or maybe a person suddenly suffers from madness or an illness or maybe post-traumatic stress disorder that causes this person to act in an unusual way. This is much like the Mitts cases before. This person, it seems, is not really acting out of the character that we knew, but because something was altering that character. We might therefore call actions that result from this either unfree or say that the person has diminished responsibility depending on the severity. Finally, Stace argues that the very fact that we punish people means that we believe in determinism in terms of those behaviors that we are trying to alter. He says that punishment is only justified as deterrence to others or to correct somebody's character, and both assume that people's behaviors can be predictably changed by causes. In other words, if you're trying to change somebody's behavior through punishment, whether it is giving a child a timeout for not sharing or putting somebody in jail for theft, we're assuming that we can alter the behavior of those and others who might see such punishment. It is important to note here that he is giving a utilitarian theory of punishment. We have not had our ethics portion of this course yet, but not everybody agrees that the purpose of punishment is to promote good consequences. So that will end this presentation. Just to briefly summarize, Stace is a determinist. Stace also believes in free will. Stace believes that free will is compatible with determinism. Stace uses a different concept of could have done otherwise than libertarians. For Stace, free will means that one could have done otherwise if one had wanted to. Stace gets his definition of free will from the way we use the word free will in ordinary language. Both free and unfree acts are caused. Praise and blame concern our unique psychologies or characters. Punishment implies acceptance of determinism. Until next time.